This eerie incident took place during the summer when I was 15. My family had embarked on a vacation to Las Vegas, but I opted to stay back home. It was that stage in life where I was eager to hang out with friends and engage in typical teenage activities. I had grand plans to host gatherings at my place, play video games, and maybe even impress some girls. So I kicked off the week by inviting a few friends over to play games and just chill. The agenda for the week was set: hanging out, gaming, and perhaps some socializing with the opposite sex. As the days went by, each one was pretty much a repeat of the last. We laughed, played, and had an all-around great time. It was shaping up to be a memorable week until the night before my parents were due to return. Everything seemed normal until the wee hours of the morning when my friends began to leave. It was around 1 a.m., and although I was tired, I found myself unable to drift off to sleep. Perhaps it was the solitude of being home alone at night that kept me awake, but I couldn't pinpoint the exact reason for my restlessness. Eventually, fatigue caught up with me, and I dozed off on the couch in the living room. Then came the terrifying moment. I was jolted awake by the sound of the front door creaking open behind me. As I turned to look, I realized I couldn't move a muscle. Panic began to set in as I heard footsteps approaching me. The footsteps stopped abruptly behind the couch, and then I heard a guttural, demonic growl right next to my ear. It sounded like a large dog, but I didn't own any pets. I tried with all my might to move, but my body remained frozen in place. I shut my eyes, trying to calm myself, and after what felt like an eternity, I regained control of my body. The entire ordeal lasted only about 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, grateful that my family would be returning later that day. To this day, that remains the most terrifying experience of my life. This was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, a chilling encounter that still haunts me to this day. It all began after a late night out with friends at the bar, a night filled with laughter and joy. I arrived home around 2 a.m., hoping to drift off into a peaceful sleep. However, despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me, the excitement of the night still coursing through my veins. I closed my eyes, attempting to force myself into slumber, but time seemed to stretch endlessly. Then, in a moment that froze my blood, I found myself unable to move, paralyzed by an unseen force. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my bedroom door began to creak open, revealing a figure so terrifying it felt like a nightmare made real. A woman, ghostly pale, drifted into the room, her movements jerky and unnatural, sending shivers down my spine. Her head was bowed, her face obscured by a curtain of dark hair, yet her eyes burned through the strands with a malevolent glow, a sickly yellow-red hue. Drawing closer, she reached the edge of my bed, her unsettling demeanor intensifying. With a bone-chilling crack, she tilted her head back, causing her hair to part, revealing a visage so grotesque it defied description. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto mine, her breath coming in eerie, labored gasps. I felt a primal fear grip me, as if my very soul was on the verge of being torn from my body. In a desperate bid for safety, I closed my eyes, silently praying for deliverance from this otherworldly horror. Even in darkness, her presence loomed, her unnerving breath echoing in my ears. Minutes stretched into eternity as I struggled to regain control of my body, the fear gripping me like a vice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I regained my ability to move. The specter had vanished, but the terror lingered, too profound to allow me to even consider sleep. The memory of that nightmarish encounter still lingers, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown horrors that may lie beyond. In high school, around the age of 15, I was going through a rebellious phase. I wasn't doing well in school, getting into trouble, and generally not being the best version of myself. One Friday night, after an intense online gaming session with friends on Grand Theft Auto, I decided to call it a night. I shut down my PS5 and crawled into bed, sleeping on my stomach. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by the sound of my window creaking open. There was a thud on the floor, as if something or someone had jumped into my room. I tried to turn and look, but I couldn't move a muscle. My body felt like it was weighed down by an invisible force, rendering me completely paralyzed. Then, I heard it. Whatever had entered my room was moving towards me, scurrying across the floor. It didn't sound like a human. It sounded more like an animal, moving on all fours, but much heavier. Fear gripped me as I imagined all sorts of terrifying scenarios. I was trapped, unable to move or even scream for help. The creature climbed onto my bed and onto my back. Its legs felt pointy, like spider legs, and it started hissing as it got closer to my head. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard before, a truly demonic hiss that sent chills down my spine. I was convinced that this was a demon from hell, here to punish me for all the wrongs I had done. In that moment of terror, I began to plead with myself in my mind, promising to be a better son and change my ways if only this nightmare would end. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I regained control of my body. I leaped out of bed, turned on the light, and saw that there was nothing there. My window was closed, just as it had been before. From that day on, I completely changed my ways. I became more respectful to my parents, focused on doing better in school, and tried to be a better person overall. That experience shook me to the core, and it's something I never want to go through again. The nightmare began with a dream so vivid, it felt like living an entire day in my sleep. Every detail was sharp and clear, from attending classes to going to work, all while an unsettling feeling of being watched lingered in the background, a shadow creeping at the edge of my consciousness. Finally, in the dream, I returned home, weary from the day, and retired to bed. But instead of rest, I found myself ensnared in sleep paralysis. It was then that the nightmare truly took hold. The once familiar sounds of my home became ominous. The bangs on my front door reverberated through the house like thunder, each strike sending a chill down my spine. Then, a deafening crash shattered the night, as if the door had been violently torn from its hinges. The chaos escalated as I heard the unmistakable sounds of furniture being tossed aside, creating a tumultuous path towards my bedroom. Struggling against my invisible restraints, I could only manage to turn my head slightly, my body feeling as heavy as stone. The air grew thick, suffocating, as the heavy, deliberate steps drew nearer, accompanied by labored breathing that seemed to echo in the darkness. My heart raced in my chest, a primal fear gripping me as I tried desperately to break free from the paralysis that held me captive. With all my will, I fought to move, to escape the impending horror, but my efforts were futile. Then a series of forceful kicks reverberated through the room, each impact shaking me to my core. The bedroom door, my last barrier of safety, gave way with a final resounding crash. In the darkness, a tall, shadowy figure loomed, advancing towards me with deliberate steps, inching closer and closer, its intentions unknown and terrifying. Just as the figure seemed within reach, I was abruptly jolted awake. Gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat, I thrashed in bed, my mind still reeling from the nightmare's grip. The room was silent, the night undisturbed, yet the terror of the dream lingered, a haunting presence that clung to me like a shroud. As I lay there, heart still pounding, I realized it had all been a dream. But the horror and fear it evoked were all too real, etched into my memory like a scar that would never fade. This experience would stay with me, a vivid reminder of the fragility of peace and the depths of the human mind's capacity for terror. When I was just 8 years old, I had an experience that still sends shivers down my spine, as vivid today as it was all those years ago. It was a typical bedtime routine, nothing out of the ordinary. I lay in my bed, my gaze fixated on the corner of my room near the door, my thoughts drifting as I slowly succumbed to sleep. Or so I thought. A sudden jolt brought me back to consciousness, and as I opened my eyes, I was met with an overwhelming darkness. The room was pitch black, save for a chilling silhouette in the corner. It was a figure crouched down, its gaze fixed on me with an intensity that froze me in terror. I tried to scream for my mom, to call out for help, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure began to move, slowly and deliberately, closing the distance between us with each silent step. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin as fear consumed me. With all the courage I could muster, I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed for my mom with every fiber of my being. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the familiar creak of the door swinging open and the click of the lights turning on. There stood my mom, her presence instantly banishing the darkness and the figure that haunted me. In the aftermath of that terrifying night, I found myself unable to sleep in my own room for weeks. Even now, 20 years later, the memory is etched into my mind, a chilling reminder of the fear and helplessness I felt that night.